The dog that knew. There's a moment, and if you've ever lived completely alone, you know exactly the one I mean. When the silence stops feeling like peace and starts feeling like a warning. I was 22 years old when I moved into my grandmother's house in Columbus, Ohio. She and my grandfather had passed within 6 months of each other, the way old couples sometimes do, like their hearts were synchronized even in the end. And rather than sell the house, my parents offered it to me. I just had to cover the property taxes and the monthly utilities. For a young guy barely out of college, it felt like the best deal in the world. And, honestly, for the first few weeks it was. The house was a wide two-story craftsman on a quiet street lined with old oak trees. It had the kind of history you could feel in the floorboards, a slight give under your left foot when you walked down the main hallway, a particular groan from the third stair on the staircase. I loved it. I felt connected to something larger than myself in those walls. I made coffee in the same kitchen where my grandmother made Sunday breakfasts for 30 years. I watched the sun set through the same living room windows where my grandfather used to read the paper. But connection, I would learn, doesn't keep you warm at 2 a.m. when the house feels too big and the rooms feel too empty. The loneliness crept up on me slowly. At first, I had buddies over on weekends, a few guys from my old apartment complex, a couple of friends from my job at the architecture firm downtown. But weekends end. People go home. And I'd find myself sitting in that big living room, the television on, but not really watching it, aware in a way I hadn't been during the day of just how much house surrounded me. That's when I decided to get a dog. I drove out to a rescue shelter on a Saturday morning in October, not entirely sure what I was looking for. And that's when I saw him, a 2-year-old German shepherd sitting in the back of his kennel, with the calm, dignified posture of a dog who had already made peace with the world. The shelter volunteer told me his name was Atlas. Previous owner had surrendered him due to a move, not because of any behavioral issues, just circumstance. He's the most even-tempered shepherd we've ever had in here, she said. Gentle giant. She wasn't wrong. Atlas was massive, probably 90 pounds, with a dark mahogany coat and ears that stood straight up like antennas. But his personality was almost zen. He barely barked. In the first 2 weeks I had him, I heard him bark exactly once, at a squirrel that had the audacity to sit on our porch railing and stare at him through the window. Otherwise, silence. Just that steady, watchful presence moving quietly through the house like he owned the place. Which, if I'm being honest, he kinda did. I bought him a dog bed the day after I adopted him and placed it right next to my own bed. I started leaving the bedroom door open at night so he could get up for water whenever he needed. Atlas almost never did. He'd usually just sigh heavily, adjust his position, and go back to sleep. But I liked knowing the option was there for him. It felt like taking care of something which, I'd come to understand, was half of what I actually needed. About 3 weeks after I adopted him, I woke up to the sound of barking. Now, I want to be specific about this, because the specificity matters. Atlas didn't just bark. Atlas lost his mind. I opened my eyes in total darkness to the sound of frantic, almost panicked barking coming from somewhere down the hallway. And for a second, I genuinely didn't understand what I was hearing. In all the weeks I'd had him, I'd never heard him make a sound like that. It was frantic, scared even. And Atlas did not scare easily. I climbed out of bed and fumbled for the hallway light. The clock on my nightstand read 2:47 a.m. My heart was already hammering. I walked down the hallway rubbing sleep from my eyes, and when they focused, I saw Atlas standing at the basement door at the far end of the hall. He was clawing at it, actually digging his nails into the wood at the base of the door, and barking so hard His whole body was shaking with the effort. Every few seconds he'd glance back at me with an expression that I can only describe as, "Do something." I stood there for a moment, honestly trying to figure out if I was still asleep. Because what do you do in that situation? I'd grown up calling my dad when things went sideways. Now there was no one to call. It was just me, a dog who was clearly more terrified than I was, and a basement door that had no business being interesting at 2:47 in the morning. I grabbed the collar of Atlas's leash hanging from the hook near the door. I thought about putting it on him and taking him downstairs together. Then I thought about what might be waiting on the other side of that door, and decided against it. But Atlas had his own opinion about the matter. The second I cracked the door open, barely an inch, just enough to peer into the darkness at the top of the stairs, Atlas shoved his nose through the gap and pushed it wide open. He bolted down the stairs before I could even react. I had no choice. I hit the light switch and followed him. The basement was exactly as I'd left it, the way my grandfather had kept it mostly. A bar area along one wall with old bar stools, a utility shelving unit, a water heater in the corner, some storage boxes my family hadn't gotten around to moving yet. Atlas was no longer barking. That somehow felt worse. A dog that terrified and then suddenly silent means one of two things. Either the threat is gone, or the threat is much closer than you think. I found him standing perfectly still in the far corner of the room, tail tucked low between his legs, staring at the old closet door in the corner. A storage closet my grandparents had used for holiday decorations as far as I knew. His tail twitched upward slightly when he heard me approach, like he was relieved I was there. But he didn't take his eyes off that door. I stood next to him and looked at it. The closet door was old wood with a simple knob latch, no lock. Nothing remarkable about it at all. But Atlas was trembling. 90 pounds of calm, even-tempered German Shepherd, trembling. Every rational thought in my head was telling me to open that door and see what was there. Probably a mouse. Probably a pipe making noise. Probably absolutely nothing. But something else, something deeper and older than rational thought, was telling me to get out of that basement immediately. I listened to the older voice. I grabbed Atlas by the collar, walked him firmly to the stairs, got him up, and shut the basement door behind us. He kept craning his neck back toward the basement the entire way down the hall. I locked my bedroom door, sat on the edge of my bed with Atlas pressed against my leg, and called my dad. He picked up on the third ring, voice thick with sleep. I explained everything. The barking, the door, the closet, Atlas's behavior. My dad was quiet for a moment and then said, in the matter-of-fact tone of a man who had never once been afraid of a basement, "You should go back down there with a kitchen knife and open that closet." I told him there was no world in which that was happening. We kept talking, and at some point during the conversation, I became aware of a sound I hadn't been expecting. I lowered the phone from my ear and listened. Footsteps. Clear, heavy, deliberate footsteps. Moving through the basement. Moving toward the stairs. Moving up. I told my dad, who immediately changed his tone. "Hang up. Call 911. Right now." By the time the police arrived, the front door was standing open, and whoever had been in my basement was long gone. The basement window, an old jalousie window near the utility area that I'd never once thought to lock, was pushed open from the inside. We figured that was the entry point. They'd come in, found me home unexpectedly, hidden in that storage closet, and waited. And waited. And eventually tried to leave. What they took. A leather bag my grandfather had kept near the bar, containing approximately $400 in cash and a few pieces of my grandmother's jewelry. I hadn't gotten around to moving upstairs. What Atlas saved me from finding out. Whatever would have happened if I'd opened that closet door alone at 2:47 in the morning. I've lived in that house for 3 more years since that night. I got better locks. I sealed every basement window. Atlas sleeps in the bed with me now. My grandmother would have hated that, probably. And I have never, not once, told him he's wrong when he decides something needs to be taken seriously. The man in the vents. I want to tell you something about fear before I tell you this story. Fear has layers. Most people think of fear as one thing, that cold water shock when something startles you, the sudden lurch of your heart, the reflex that makes you gasp or jump back. But real fear, the kind that comes from a threat you can't see, from a danger that's present but not yet defined, that kind of fear operates on a different level entirely. It doesn't come in a flash. It seeps in slowly, like water through a foundation crack, until you realize you're already soaked through, and you have no idea when it started. I was 17 years old, living with my parents in a suburb of San Antonio, Texas, and I already had a complicated relationship with basements. Had since I was a little kid. I don't know what it is about underground spaces that gets under my skin. The way the air feels different down there. Heavier somehow, like it's been sitting undisturbed for too long. The way sound behaves differently. The way you're always aware on some level that you're below the surface of things. By the time I was 17, I'd mostly learned to manage it. I could be in the basement alone for extended periods without any real anxiety, as long as I stayed busy. That was the trick. Keep your hands and your mind occupied. Don't let the stillness get in the door. On a cold Friday night in November, I was alone in the house. My parents were out at a dinner party. Wouldn't be back until after midnight. The biggest television in the house was in the basement, which was also where we kept all the gaming equipment. So that's where I set up camp for the evening. I had a blanket. I had snacks. I had my headset on. 2 controllers, and I was deep into an online session with a few friends playing one of those massive multiplayer shooters that were everywhere that year. I was completely absorbed, headset on full volume, trash-talking my friends, not thinking about anything except the game, which is exactly why, when I heard the sound, it cut through everything, even over the game audio, even through the headphones, I heard it. A dull, heavy thunk from somewhere behind me. I paused. I pulled one side of the headset off my ear. The basement behind me was a wall of clutter. My dad's tool area, storage bins, an old weight bench he'd been meaning to start using for approximately a decade. Boxes piled high enough to create actual visual barriers. If I wanted to see all the way to the back wall, I'd have to physically get up and walk back there. The space was just that packed. For a long moment, I sat very still and listened. Nothing. I told myself it was the house settling. In older homes in San Antonio, the soil shifts as temperatures change. It's notorious for causing structural movement, little pops and creaks, and occasionally something that sounds disturbingly like a footstep. I put the headset back on. I went back to the game, but I left one ear uncovered, just in case. About 20 minutes later, I heard the second sound. This one was different. This one wasn't a soft thunk. It was a clank, hard and metallic, with a ringing echo that didn't belong to wood or drywall or settling soil. It was the sound of something with real mass striking something made of metal, hard enough to make it ring. I turned off the console. The silence that followed felt enormous. I got up slowly and turned around to face the back half of the basement. Our house had a central HVAC system. The ducts ran through the basement ceiling and down the walls before connecting to the vents in the upper floors. There was one large intake vent on the back wall of the basement, near the floor, maybe 18 inches wide and 12 inches tall, covered by a heavy metal grate. I'd walked past that vent 10,000 times without ever giving it a second thought. I was thinking about it now. I walked toward the back of the basement the way you walk, when every instinct you have is telling you to turn around and leave. One slow step at a time, arms slightly out for balance, watching. I got close enough to the vent to see it clearly. The grate I tried to tell myself it looked totally normal. Just a vent. Just a piece of metal in a wall. And then the pain hit me. I don't know how else to describe it. It was a physical sensation. A cold, twisting pain low in my stomach. The kind your body produces when it perceives danger at a cellular level before your brain is caught up. I've felt variations of it since. The millisecond before a car accident. The moment you realize you've taken a wrong turn in an unfamiliar neighborhood at night. Your body knows things your conscious mind is still processing. My body knew something was wrong with that vent. I stopped walking. I stood maybe 6 feet away from it, just looking. A hand reached out of the vent grate and began waving me forward. Not a full hand. Fingers and a wrist, and the suggestion of a forearm beyond the metal slats. 5 fingers extending toward me with a slow, almost lazy beckoning gesture, like whoever it belonged to had all the time in the world. Then a voice, low, rough, with a rasp to it like a voice that had spent too many years outdoors or in cigarette smoke. 2 words, "Come here." A pause. Then, "I need help. I want to tell you that I immediately acted rationally, that I turned and sprinted for the stairs, or that I grabbed something to use as a weapon, or that I had some clear, decisive response. I didn't. I walked backward, slowly, 1 step at a time, mouth hanging open, watching the hand. The hand gripped the vent grate, started pulling, started shaking it. Rhythmically at first, then with increasing force. Bang, bang, bang. The metal grate rattling in its housing, screws straining. Whoever was behind that wall was trying to break it open. I found my voice. "I'm calling the cops." I heard myself shout it. Didn't decide to, just heard the words come out of me. The shaking didn't stop. I grabbed my phone from the couch and called 911. The operator picked up, and I told her there was someone in my basement vents or behind my basement walls, and I needed help right now. She told me to go upstairs immediately, lock myself in a room and not open the door for anyone, except a uniformed police officer. I was 3 steps from the basement stairs when I heard a door slam somewhere below me. Not the vent. A door. A real door. Swinging open hard. The way doors open when someone isn't trying to be quiet anymore. And then the screaming started. I can't fully explain the quality of sound that came out of that man. It wasn't language, not at first, just raw noise, the kind that comes from a person who has dropped all pretense and is operating on pure animal aggression. Then, underneath the noise, actual words. "Where are you? I know you're up here. I'm gonna find you." I heard him hit the stairs like he was taking them 3 at a time. I ran to the upstairs bathroom, closest room with a lock, slammed the door, slid the deadbolt, pressed my back against the wall next to the door, and stood there hyperventilating while the 911 operator stayed on the line telling me to breathe, stay quiet, help is coming. He tried my door. The knob rattled. Then his fist hit the door once, twice, 3 times, hard enough that I saw the frame flex slightly with each impact. The door was old. It was not going to hold if he decided to put his full weight into it. The window, single-story bathroom, window facing the side yard, maybe a 10-foot drop to the bushes below. I heard him stop pounding. I heard nothing. I opened the window, sat on the sill, and dropped. I hit the bushes hard and rolled out onto the grass just as a patrol car pulled onto our street, lights rolling. I ran straight for the officers, ran the way you run when the alternative is something you can't let yourself fully imagine. They put me in the back of the locked squad car while they went inside. I sat there shaking, watching the front door. Less than 5 minutes later, they walked out with a man in handcuffs. Older, disheveled, eyes wild even from across the yard. They put him in the back seat beside me temporarily while they called for a second unit. And I spent 45 of the most uncomfortable seconds of my life not making eye contact with a man who looked at me like I had personally wronged him by existing. I never got a clear explanation for what he was doing in our walls. The officers theorized he'd been using the ventilation system to move between homes in the neighborhood. There were other reports, other residents who'd found signs of entry they couldn't explain. They called him a transient, a disturbed individual, someone with nowhere to go who'd found a way in. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know how long he'd been in there before that night. I still don't go into that basement alone. The boiler room, this one is different from the other stories. I need you to understand that before I tell it. The other stories have explanations. A burglar who hid in a closet. A disturbed man who found his way into the infrastructure of a house. Terrible things, genuinely terrifying things, but things with human answers. Police were called, cases were opened, logic eventually prevailed. This story doesn't have a clean ending, and honestly, after all these years, I'm not sure it ever will. What I'm about to tell you comes from early childhood, a series of memories that blur at the edges the way childhood memories do. Details softening over time until you're not entirely sure what you actually remember and what you've constructed from the pieces. But there are certain things I remember with absolute clarity. The kind of clarity that comes not from the sharpness of the memory, but from the depth of the feeling attached to it. Some memories stick because they were happy. Some stick because they were terrifying. These belong to the second category. I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. My family, my parents, my older brother Caleb, and I were living in a rented house in a suburb outside of Portland, Oregon. The house was older, a late 70s ranch-style single-story, with a partial basement that my father had claimed as his recreation space. Down there he had a pool table, a foosball table, an old tube television, and a modest collection of video games. For Caleb and me, the basement was paradise. We spent entire weekend afternoons down there, lost in games and competition and the particular freedom that comes from being slightly out of earshot of your parents. The rest of the basement, the part that wasn't the rec area, was utility space. A boiler, a washing machine and dryer, a water softener, exposed pipes running along the ceiling, a single bare bulb on a pull chain for light. The door to that space was wooden, hollow core with a simple knob, nothing special about it. But Caleb and I had an unspoken agreement that neither of us went in there alone, and neither of us went in there at all unless we had to. Looking back, I don't know when that agreement formed or what prompted it. It was just understood. The first incident happened on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. We were in the middle of a racing game on the old tube TV, not even paying attention to the utility room door, when we heard it. A sound like something heavy falling, followed by the distinct metallic click and thud of the dryer door swinging shut. We both heard it. We both looked at each other. "Mom," Caleb called out. No answer. We looked toward the utility room door. It was closed, same as always. The light under the door was off. We could see no movement through the crack at the bottom. We ran upstairs. We told our parents. Our father, a practical, unemotional man who diagnosed problems by taking them apart and finding the broken piece, went downstairs and checked every corner of the utility room. Came back up and told us it was probably the dryer cycling off. The mechanism sometimes made noise as it cooled. We accepted this because we were children and that's what children do. We went back downstairs. We played games. We put it out of our minds. The second incident happened maybe 3 months later, late at night. I was up past my bedtime. I don't remember why. Stomach ache or bad dream or just childhood insomnia. And I was walking to the kitchen for a glass of water. I passed the door to the basement in the hallway. Stopped. From downstairs I could hear, clearly and unmistakably, the television turning on. That specific sound, the thick electronic click, and the high-frequency hiss of an old tube TV warming up, is one of those sounds that's so specific to its object that there's no mistaking it for anything else. Our television was old enough to make that sound, and that sound was coming from the basement. I stood in the hallway listening for a long moment. Then I went and woke up my parents. My father was not pleased. He was convinced I'd left the TV on and was now constructing an elaborate story to avoid getting in trouble. He went downstairs, turned off the television, and came back up. "Old TV with a loose connection," he said. "It does that sometimes." Caleb and I weren't entirely convinced, but the incidents were spread out enough, and our parents were dismissive enough, that we kept the fear manageable. We filed it under things we don't fully understand and went on with our lives. Then came the last incident. We were 2 weeks from moving out of that house. My parents had already shipped most of the furniture and boxes to the new place, a larger house in a better school district, a move they were excited about. The basement had been largely cleared out, but as a small mercy, our parents had let us keep the television and the gaming equipment until the final moving day. So Caleb and I were downstairs, cross-legged on the bare carpet where the couch used to be, playing video games in an otherwise empty room. It hit me in the back of the head. Not hard, enough to startle, not enough to hurt. I turned around fast, expecting Caleb to be right behind me with whatever he'd thrown. But Caleb was 4 feet away, controller in both hands, watching me with the same confused expression I must have had on my face. Between us, bouncing slowly across the bare carpet, was a red rubber ball. We both looked at it. We both looked at each other. We both looked at the utility room door. It was closing. Not fast, not slamming, closing. Slowly, deliberately, as if someone on the other side was pulling it shut with one hand while watching us through the narrowing gap. We saw the last inch of darkness disappear as the latch clicked softly into place. We left everything, controllers on the ground, TV still running, and we ran. We did not stop running until we were in the kitchen with all the lights on. Our parents came downstairs. They were gone longer than usual. When they came back up, they didn't explain. They told us to go to our rooms and stay there. Their voices were quiet in a way that felt different from their usual measured calm. There was something compressed in it, something controlled. My father looked like a man who had just encountered a problem that didn't have a broken piece he could find. A police car arrived about 40 minutes later. We watched it from our bedroom windows. 2 officers went inside. They were there for about 20 minutes. We never heard the full story. Not that night, not until months after we'd moved, when our parents finally sat us down and explained what they'd found. The boiler room door, which opened inward, had been held shut from the inside. My father had tried to push it open, substantial force, and something on the other side had held it. Not a mechanical failure. The door itself was fine. Something had been pulling it shut. They found nothing in the room. No one. No animal. No evidence of entry or presence beyond what had always been there. My father called the police anyway. He didn't know what else to do. I'm 41 years old now. I've lived in 6 houses since that one. I've been in hundreds of basements, unfinished basements, storage basements, wine cellars, utility rooms. I'm not afraid of basements in any general sense, but I am still afraid of that specific memory, not of what it might mean. I've made my peace with not knowing what it means. What stays with me is the image of that door, closing, slowly, with a gentleness that was somehow worse than violence, because whatever was on the other side of that door was not panicking. It was not trying to escape. It was simply deciding to close the door. And somehow in all the years since, I've never been able to shake the feeling that whatever it was, it closed that door on purpose, that it chose not to show itself, that it was content in that final moment to simply let us wonder. I don't know what to make of that. I'm not sure I ever will. But I know this: some doors, once they close on you, never quite open back up all the way. And some basements, some specific, ordinary, unremarkable basements, are keeping secrets that don't care whether you believe in them or not.